Early educators and public school people and private school people should be talking to one another so that the early education system directly feeds kids into the needs prepared that the school system suggests. That you recognize the importance of teachers. We don't do that as a nation. The countries that are beating us, and I'll show you some of them now, they're pulling 100% of their teachers from the top third of their high school graduation class. You know what the number is in the United States? 22%. Why is that? We don't pay them enough. We don't recognize their importance. So you can come up with all you want in terms of educational reform, but if as a country, if we don't attract more of our best and brightest into the teaching profession, we can do everything else. It's the teacher in the classroom that ultimately makes the difference. Business Roundtable also talked about the primacy of parents. Absolutely. That if you're spending public money, you need to demand public results, measurable results. You need partnerships to build, not new stuff, get the people already in that business working together closely. You put those together in Stokes County, you get something that looks just like the Stokes County Partnership for Children, Stokes Partnership for Children. And it is particularly significant that Cindy, unlike many of her peers, recognizes the importance of taking that economic message to the business community. That she is joined in that effort today by people like Stokes Economic Development and King Chamber says an awful lot. First time I met Alan, I don't even know if Alan remembers this, was in a business meeting in Charlotte. We were sitting at a table side by side, and the other people at that table were talking about water and sewer and industrial sites, and that's important. Alan was talking about knowledge infrastructure. That without that, the rest of the stuff doesn't count. And for early education, for economic development, he's exactly right. I know there's a lot of excitement here, as there should be, about 52 becoming 74, and all of a sudden the interstate mileage in Stokes County goes from 6 or 9 or whatever it is, it's a paltry number, into something substantially greater. Think of early education as part of a knowledge infrastructure. If you can expand that, if you can make the quality of that as strong as possible, the rest of the knowledge infrastructure increases. In the global gap, the author of this book talked to more than 200 major employers in the United States. Most of them corporate, some of them military. And he said, tell me what you aren't finding in your workforce today. And they identified 7 things. Know that without exception, those are all issues that can be fostered or stymied in the first years of life. I travel with corporations all the time and they tell me the same thing. We got these damn kids today, they've Googled their way through high school. They don't know how to think. And some of the companies that I've worked with have located overseas not because they couldn't find a workforce here, but because they couldn't find an educated workforce here. People who didn't know how to think or collaborate. People that simply memorized their way through school. So if you're a businessman or businesswoman out there, and you're looking for a workforce that fires on all cylinders, know where that starts. That starts right here. To put it in context, when Conrad was born, there are about 120 billion cells in his brain. Sure, will be established, for better or worse, and I'm sure in your case for better. You can look at a child's brain that has been nurtured and loved and read to. It looks different on the inside than a brain of a child who has been parked in front of a TV set. In the first few years of life, every second, 700 connections are made between brain cells, which means next time you see Conrad, if it was a 24-hour period, there'd be about 40 million more cell connections in his brain than there were last time you saw him. There have been long-term studies of the effect of quality early education. I won't go through all the details here, but suffice it to say that consistently, those studies that have divided kids in the early years into 2 groups, one group getting very high quality early education, the other group sort of parked in the corner with a gingerbread and a cot. They've tracked those, one study in particular up in Michigan has tracked those kids for 40 years now and found that without exception, the kids that got high quality early education, they're better educated, they own more real property, they have more stable family lives. They're tax generators. The kids who did not get that, they get arrested more, there are more children out of wedlock, they own less property, there are higher rates of incarceration. They unfortunately become tax consumers. So if you're looking as to where to invest public dollars or your own dollars in terms of your young children, figure conservatively for every dollar that the public invested in that one program I'm talking about, the long-term societal benefit was $9. It's not a bad return. Well, it's happened to us. How many people here can remember back to 1957? Some of you. Some of you read about in the history books. After World War II, America was on top of the world. We were number one and worth everything worth being number one at. Cock of the walk. And then we woke up one October morning in 1957 to this headline and saw that those brave but alleged stupid Soviets had beat us into space. We were shocked. We started questioning ourselves. Our allies started questioning us. Because if the Soviets could put a Sputnik into space, they could also have the rocket throw power to hit a missile, aim a missile, and hit the continental United States. So the issue was one of pride, but it was also one of national security. And America went to work, stunned out of our complacency. Eventually, 400,000 of us, working for 23,000 different companies, went to work for something called NASA, or private contractors working for NASA. Well, although we worked hard, it was 4 years after Sputnik that we found out that the first man into space was not going to be John Glenn or Alan Shepard, but Yuri Gagarin of the Ukraine. 4 years later, we were catching up, but we were still behind on something as important, the space program. The American answer was finally delivered July of 1969. When that Apollo 11 Saturn V rocket blasted off from Cape Canaveral, there was a launch of a 3-stage rocket. The payload, 2 Americans safely to the surface of the moon, 3 Americans back home. Make an analogy. Think of early education as the launch of kids into an academic trajectory. The launch is followed by a series of events. The payload here is an American workforce, future ready and globally competitive. Launches are critical in both cases. If you get the launch wrong, there are problems. And we've had launches that have gone wrong. Challenger, 73 seconds after liftoff, disaster. Why? There was a launch problem. We lost another shuttle 16 years later when it disintegrated coming back into the atmosphere. Well, was that a launch problem? Yeah, it was a launch problem. Because although it happened well after launch, there was a piece of foam that fell off the shuttle and put a crack in the wing. And when it re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, superheated gas got inside and blew it up. So sometimes launch problems are evident at launch. Sometimes they show up later. When the educational system fails, when the launch doesn't go right there are also consequences. The consequences here look something like this. High rates of unemployment because people are not prepared, don't have the skills for the jobs of today. They get a poor start educationally and they never catch up. High rates of poverty. High rates of incarceration. There's one place where we lead the world by far, the percent of our population incarcerated. The other cost is what the rest of us pay. All the social carrying costs. An American trajectory versus the rest of the world that looks something like this. By the important economic and educational measures, that slope looks an awful lot like that slope. You know, back when I was growing up, NASA was something to be proud of. And they still have a great non-manned space program. But you know the only way we can get American astronauts into space today? Russian rockets. We don't have rockets that will take men and women into orbit or beyond. You know, NASA might as well change its logo from that to something like that. We're hitching a ride. That's the way we get in. And every couple of months we have to send our top economists over to China to explain to them how we're going to do better, and it's worth continuing to invest in U.S. bonds because all that debt that we've rolled up, we can't afford it. We can't carry that ourselves. America is less master of its own fate than it ever has been. And yet we just sort of seem to, we'll keep on keeping on. We're fine. How do we allow this to happen? I think part of the reason is this. We've had no Sputnik moment. Nothing to shake us out. Nothing to wake us up. Economically, we've had no Pearl Harbor. Educationally, we've had no 9/11. Just a general erosion of the American position. Over time, a little bit here, a little bit there, we fall back, we fall back. But over several decades, erosion can start looking very dramatic, and the consequences can be profound. You know what that is, don't you?